Sir, that's a lot of cash.
Funds are mine.
Bank transaction solely documented.
Hands on the counter. Keep them there. Don't reach. My hands haven't moved.
The envelope hits the counter at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. $300,000. The teller's eyes move from the money to the man's face, then back to the money. Her hand doesn't move toward the deposit slip. Instead, she leans forward. She demands to know where the cash came from. She states it doesn't look legitimate. Security camera footage from Horizon Trust Bank's main branch captures what happens next. A transaction that should take minutes becomes a standoff. A customer treated like a suspect. A system that reveals itself the moment it feels threatened. Because the man standing at that counter holds something no one in the building realizes yet, power they can't see until it's too late. Before we continue, take a second right now. If you believe someone should be treated with dignity regardless of how they look or what they're wearing, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you think stories like this need to be told. Because what happens next proves why silence is never neutral, and tomorrow's story will show you what happens when the system finally gets challenged. Rosie Baker is behind the counter when Eduardo Hall approaches. She is 42 years old and has worked at Horizon Trust for 9 years. Her record shows consistency, strict adherence to protocol, enforcement that often exceeds written policy, and a pattern. 7 complaints filed over her tenure. All from black customers. All closed without action. Miscommunication, the files read. Difference in perception. Nothing disciplinary. Eduardo places the envelope on the counter without ceremony. It is thick, sealed, and accompanied by a single deposit slip. He slides both forward. Rosie's hand stops halfway to the items. Her eyes fix on the envelope's bulk, then rise to his face. Her voice cuts through the ambient hum of the branch. She demands to know where the cash came from. She insists the amount raises questions. She states the source needs verification before any processing can happen. Eduardo's hands remain flat on the counter, visible and still. His response is measured, factual. He explains the funds represent proceeds from a private equity transaction. A partial stake sale in a logistics holding. Fully documented. He offers that the paperwork is in his bag if needed. Rosie does not reach for the envelope. She does not ask for the documentation. Instead, she repeats the question louder this time, her tone sharpening. The words carry across the lobby. Nearby customers glance over. Conversation slow. At the adjacent window, another transaction unfolds in parallel. A man in his 50s, white, well-dressed, slides a stack of checks across the counter. The total exceeds $350,000. The teller greets him by name, processes the deposit in under 3 minutes, and wishes him a pleasant afternoon. No questions about source. No verification requests. No delay. Eduardo offers again to provide documentation. Rosie's hand moves not toward the deposit slip but toward the alert button beneath her station. She signals without looking away from him. The accusation becomes explicit now. She declares the money appears suspicious, the transaction irregular. She announces she will not proceed without manager approval. James Greenberg responds within seconds. He is the contracted security guard assigned to the branch, 38 years old, former county law enforcement. He crosses the lobby floor with practiced efficiency and positions himself directly behind Eduardo. His stance is close, deliberate. His voice is low and firm. He orders Eduardo to keep his hands visible. No sudden movements. Eduardo states calmly that his hands have not moved from the counter. James does not step back. The branch atmosphere shifts. Tellers continue processing transactions at other windows, but their pace slows. Customers in line adjust their positions, some pulling out phones, recording discreetly. The hum of routine banking fractures into something else. Awareness, discomfort, the recognition that something is wrong. Rosie presses the under-counter button a second time. Her voice rises again, insistent. She tells Eduardo he needs to step aside. She declares the transaction cannot proceed here. She insists it requires escalation. She flips his identification card face down on the counter and repeats the demand for source verification, her questions now accusatory rather than procedural. Eduardo requests to speak with the branch manager. Rosie does not acknowledge the request immediately. She questions the legitimacy of the cash again, her tone suggesting criminality without stating it directly. James remains close behind, arms now crossed, his presence a physical boundary. Other customers begin to leave the line. Some step toward other tellers. Others simply wait, watching. The recordings continue. Eduardo Hall is 51 years old. He holds a private equity portfolio valued in the hundreds of millions, with significant positions in infrastructure, commercial logistics, and real estate. His holdings are diverse, his approach low profile. He dresses without ostentation, drives a modest vehicle, and conducts business quietly. He has maintained accounts at Horizon Trust Bank for over a decade. His deposits are frequent, his transactions documented, his relationship with the institution long-standing. None of this is visible to Rosie Baker or James Greenberg. What they see is a black man with an envelope of cash. The standoff extends. Rosie refuses to touch the deposit slip. James refuses to step back. Eduardo refuses to move from the counter without explanation. The branch manager's office door remains closed. Then it opens. Francis Jensen emerges from the back office, his attention initially elsewhere, a folder in one hand, his phone in the other. He is 47 years old, 12 years with Horizon Trust, branch manager for the past 4. His record is clean in the institutional sense. No major compliance violations, consistent performance metrics, steady customer satisfaction ratings. He moves toward the teller line, his expression shifting as he registers the scene. Rosie standing back from her station, James positioned behind a customer, the tension palpable. He approaches window 3 without urgency, unaware yet of what has been said, what has been refused, and what is about to collapse. Jensen reaches the counter and addresses Rosie first. She responds quickly, her summary efficient and damning. Large cash deposit. Suspicious origin. Refusal to provide adequate sourcing. Potential theft. Jensen turns to Eduardo, his demeanor professional but firm. He repeats the question. He asks where the money came from. He states the amount triggers regulatory protocols. He insists the bank must verify legitimacy before processing. Eduardo's response does not change. He explains the funds are legitimate proceeds from a documented private equity transaction. He states paperwork is available. He notes he has stated this multiple times. He also observes, voice still calm, that other customers, several of whom completed deposits exceeding his own earlier that morning, faced no such scrutiny. No questions about source. No security presence. No delays. Jensen glances briefly toward the other teller windows, then back to Eduardo. The observation is dismissed without explanation. He tells Eduardo the line is busy. Other customers are waiting. He insists Eduardo needs to step aside to avoid further disruption. Eduardo does not move. He asks for the specific policy being applied. Rosie interjects from behind the counter. She claims he is refusing to cooperate, being difficult. James remains positioned close behind, arms crossed, his presence a silent reinforcement of authority. Jensen's tone shifts. He warns that if Eduardo will not comply, corporate compliance will be involved. He states the matter will escalate beyond branch level. He pulls his phone from his pocket, steps several feet away and makes a brief call. His words are low, inaudible to Eduardo, but his gestures suggest urgency. He returns to the counter and extends his hand. He demands Eduardo's account card. For verification purposes. Eduardo slides the card across the counter without protest. Jensen takes it, returns to the terminal behind Rosie's station and begins typing. His fingers move steadily across the keyboard, pulling up account records, transaction history, profile details. The screen refreshes. He scrolls. Then his hands slow. He pauses, scrolls again and stops entirely. The color drains from his face. The lobby has grown quieter. Customers sense the shift even before understanding it. Rosie stands rigid behind the counter, arms crossed. James has not moved. Eduardo's hands remain flat on the surface, exactly where they have been since he first placed the envelope down. Jensen stares at the screen for several seconds longer than necessary. Then he steps back from the terminal, the card still in his hand, and returns to the counter. His voice when he speaks is lower, controlled. He addresses Eduardo formally as Mr. Hall. He states Eduardo is the majority shareholder of Horizon Trust Bank. Approximately 90% ownership. The words land without ceremony. Rosie's head snaps toward Jensen, disbelief immediate. She protests that the information cannot be accurate. James takes a single instinctive step backward. The power structure that held the room together for the past 20 minutes collapses in an instant. Jensen does not wait for questions. He turns sharply to Rosie, his voice now firm and direct. He orders her to step away from the station. He tells her not to speak further. He addresses James next, voice equally decisive. He tells him to move aside. He states James's presence is no longer required. Rosie opens her mouth to protest. Jensen cuts her off with a raised hand. He turns back to Eduardo, his posture entirely different now, deferential, apologetic, urgent. He offers to process the deposit immediately. No further questions. No delays. Full service. Eduardo does not respond immediately. He simply observes the shift, the sudden deference, the scramble to undo what has already been done. His expression remains neutral. Jensen steps away again, phone already to his ear. This call is longer, his tone clipped and professional. Corporate legal. Compliance oversight. Full incident review required. He requests immediate escalation, his words careful, his urgency unmistakable. The branch atmosphere transforms, not relief but panic. Not resolution but exposure. The standoff is over. But the reckoning has only begun. Have you ever watched a situation unfold like this and wondered how far bias can go before someone finally speaks up? Drop a comment right now. Tell me if you've experienced something similar or what you think should happen next. And if this story is hitting close to home, share it. Because what happens next proves the system only corrects itself when its own survival is threatened. Corporate compliance officers arrive within 53 minutes. 2 of them. They carry encrypted tablets, corporate identification, and authority that supersedes Jensen's entirely. They do not address Eduardo directly. They sequester themselves in the back office with Jensen, close the door and begin the review. The security footage is pulled from multiple angles. Overhead cameras, teller stations, and surveillance. The timeline is reconstructed frame by frame. Rosie's initial refusal. Her repeated accusations. James's positioning. Jensen's dismissal of Eduardo's documentation offer. The contrast footage is damning. The white customer at the adjacent window, his $350,000 deposit processed without question, without delay, without security presence. The officers take statements from staff. Rosie is called in first. Her account is recorded, time-stamped, and cross-referenced against the footage. Discrepancies are noted. James is interviewed next. His explanation of standard security protocol is measured against actual branch policy. The gaps are documented. Jensen is questioned last. The review is not a conversation. It is procedural dismantling. The decisions come swiftly. Rosie Baker is placed on immediate administrative leave, pending full investigation. Her employee badge is collected before she exits the building. She is instructed not to return to any Horizon Trust location without explicit authorization. James Greenberg security firm receives formal notice within the hour, contract termination, effective immediately, for failure to adhere to non-discriminatory service standards. Jensen himself is suspended, his branch authority revoked, his access to internal systems frozen. The directives issued internally are comprehensive. Mandatory implicit bias training for all branch staff, to be completed within 30 days. Full audit of large cash deposit protocols across all locations. Expanded compliance oversight with quarterly reviews. Temporary freeze on branch performance bonuses pending systems evaluation. Eduardo gathers his identification and the envelope of cash. The deposit has not been processed. Jensen approaches one final time, his tone conciliatory, his offer explicit. He states the transaction can be completed now, immediately, with his personal oversight. Eduardo's response is quiet and final. He tells Jensen not here. He states Jensen's position was made clear. So was his staff's. He exits the building without raising his voice, without demanding apology, without theatrics. The envelope remains sealed. 4 days later, Eduardo enters a different Horizon Trust branch across the city. He approaches the counter, places the same envelope down, and slides the deposit slip forward. The teller greets him professionally, reviews the slip, asks standard verification questions, purpose of deposit, source of funds, and accepts his brief, factual responses without challenge. The transaction is processed in 4 minutes and 37 seconds. No security involvement. No accusations. No escalation. He receives a printed receipt, thanks the teller, and leaves. The original branch operates under temporary systems review. Large transactions are redirected to other locations. Tellers process only routine deposits and withdrawals. Conversations remain brief, procedural. The incident is documented internally not as discrimination but as a procedural and judgment failure. Language carefully chosen to avoid liability exposure. No public press release is issued. No apology is posted to the bank's website. The reforms implemented are tied explicitly to protecting shareholder interests and institutional reputation, not to moral accountability. The system corrects itself because it was forced to, not because it chose to. Eduardo does not speak publicly about the incident. He does not file a lawsuit. He does not demand resignations or public accountability. His silence is deliberate. The system revealed itself without his assistance. It exposed its own rot the moment it realized who held the power it had failed to recognize. The truth required no argument. It simply waited to be seen. Francis Jensen returns to the branch on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after his suspension began. He is permitted 30 minutes to clear his desk under supervision. A compliance officer waits near the door. Jensen moves methodically, files into a box, framed certificates removed from the wall, desk drawers emptied one by one. The locked drawer resists at first. He retrieves the key from his personal belongings and pulls it open. Inside, beneath outdated branch memos and forgotten correspondence, is a sealed manila envelope. It is labeled in precise handwriting, "Customer Complaints, Archived." The date is 7 months earlier. Jensen opens it. The complaint is typed, formal and thorough. It describes an incident nearly identical to Eduardo Hall's experience. A black customer, name redacted in the archived copy, attempted to deposit a substantial cash amount. The teller questioned the source aggressively. Security was summoned without cause. The transaction was refused. The customer left without resolution. No follow-up was conducted. No apology issued. No policy review initiated. The complaint had been reviewed by Jensen's predecessor, a branch manager who retired 6 months ago. The decision was documented in a single sentence: insufficient evidence of policy violation. Complaint closed. Jensen reads the details slowly. The pattern is unmistakable. The language is almost identical: suspicious transaction, refusal to process, security escalation, no recourse. He recognizes the same selective enforcement, the same microaggressions, the same institutional reflex to protect itself rather than examine its practices. He participated in the exact cycle he could have stopped. The complaint was buried not because it was false, but because it was inconvenient. The customer posed no threat to the bank's operations. No ownership stake. No institutional leverage. No power to force accountability. So the complaint was sealed, archived, and forgotten. Eduardo Hall was not the first. He was simply the first who owned the institution that failed him. Jensen sets the envelope down. The compliance officer near the door checks his watch. Time is running short. Jensen places the complaint back in the drawer, closes the box of his belongings and stands. The officer escorts him to the exit without conversation. The branch continues operating. New tellers are hired. Bias training sessions are completed. Audit reports are filed. The reforms are implemented with efficiency and thoroughness, not because the institution learned, but because the institution was forced to protect itself. The earlier complaint remains archived, the customer never contacted, the harm never addressed. Accountability arrived only when the victim held power. Justice was conditional, granted not as a right but as a calculated response to threat. The system did not change because it recognized its failure. It changed because it feared the consequences of being caught. Eduardo Hall never sought vindication. He did not need to. His silence was more powerful than any accusation. The bank revealed itself the moment it realized who he was. The transformation was immediate, total, and transparent. Respect was not earned through character or documentation. It was triggered by ownership. The footage remains archived in Horizon Trust's internal systems. Rosie Baker's dismissal is documented as termination for cause. James Greenberg's contract termination is filed under security protocol violation. Francis Jensen's suspension is converted to resignation by mutual agreement. No public record of discrimination exists. No settlement is paid. No precedent is set. The institution corrects itself internally, quietly, and moves forward. But the truth remains: Eduardo Hall was not an isolated case. He was the first with the power to force consequences. The others, those who filed complaints, those who walked out without resolution, those whose treatment was dismissed as miscommunication, received nothing. Their harm was real. Their complaints were legitimate. Their justice was denied. Because they did not own the bank. The envelope that hit the counter at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday carried more than $300,000. It carried a test the institution failed the moment it began. The system exposed itself not through malice but through reflex, an ingrained pattern so normalized it operated without conscious thought until confronted by the one variable it could not ignore. Power it could not see until it was too late. The story ends not with resolution but with recognition. Systemic bias does not require intent. It requires only inertia. Institutions do not reform out of principle. They reform when their survival demands it. And justice, when it finally arrives, often comes too late for those who needed it first. Eduardo Hall made his deposit. The bank kept its doors open. And somewhere, in another branch, on another Tuesday, the cycle continues, waiting for the next person with the power to force it into the light.